Bill Murray has spent decades cultivating a public image that feels effortless. The mischievous genius, the unpredictable comic, the legend who might crash your karaoke night or wander into a stranger's softball field. To audiences, that looseness reads as charm. To Hollywood, it's often been framed as brilliance that can't be contained. But behind the myth-making, Murray's reputation has always carried a second, far less whimsical side. Stories of on-set volatility, emotional cruelty, and outright hostility toward collaborators have circulated for years, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted. Let's take a closer look. Lucy Liu and the Breaking Point on Charlie's Angels. One of the most infamous clashes involving Bill Murray unfolded on the set of Charlie's Angels, where his interactions with Lucy Liu crossed from tension into outright hostility. At the time, Liu was still early in her rise to mainstream stardom, while Murray was a veteran comedy icon, a power imbalance that made the situation even more uncomfortable. Accounts from the set describe Murray singling Liu out during rehearsals, criticizing her acting in front of the cast and crew. What might have passed as abrasive creative feedback in another context reportedly took on a sharper edge here, escalating into personal insults rather than professional notes. Liu eventually reached her breaking point. Quote, "I will defend myself," she later said. "I don't care if someone is a movie star. I think that when you feel demeaned, you have to stand up for yourself." That confrontation reportedly ended with Liu telling Murray in no uncertain terms that his behavior was unacceptable. The fallout was immediate and lasting. Murray did not return for the sequel, and his role was recast. While the studio never publicly framed the decision as disciplinary, the message was clear. This was not a creative disagreement that could be smoothed over. For many observers, the incident became a turning point in how Murray's on-set reputation was discussed publicly. Liu's refusal to stay silent resonated with other performers who had quietly endured similar treatment from powerful figures. Geena Davis. Not all conflicts with Bill Murray exploded into public confrontations. Some were quieter, more insidious, and arguably more revealing. Geena Davis's experience working with Murray on Quick Change falls squarely into that category. Davis had spoken on Murray's behavior not as a single blowup, but as a pattern, one that made the working environment uncomfortable from the very beginning. In her account, Murray's conduct blurred the line between joking and harassment, creating an atmosphere where discomfort was easy to dismiss as humor if you weren't the target. Quote, "The first day I met him, he pulled me aside and said, 'I like women with big hair,'" Davis recalled. "Then he put his hands on my hair." What made the situation especially troubling was the context. Davis was starring in a film Murray co-directed and co-wrote, meaning he held creative authority over nearly every aspect of the production. That imbalance left little room for confrontation, and Davis has described feeling trapped between maintaining professionalism and protecting her own boundaries. Unlike more explosive on-set disputes, this kind of behavior often leaves no dramatic paper trail, just a lingering sense of violation and frustration. Richard Dreyfuss. If Lucy Liu's conflict represented a breaking point and Geena Davis's story highlighted quiet discomfort, Richard Dreyfuss's experience with Bill Murray landed somewhere in between, open disdain that never softened with time. The two actors worked together on What About Bob, a film that ultimately became a comedy classic. Behind the scenes, however, the experience was anything but lighthearted. Dreyfuss has repeatedly described Murray's behavior as antagonistic, saying the actor seemed determined to push his buttons at every opportunity. "I would say that Bill Murray is a drunken bully," he said bluntly. "He was a drunken bully on that film." According to Dreyfuss, Murray's antics weren't improvised moments of genius, but calculated efforts to undermine and humiliate him both on and off camera. The tension reportedly became so severe that the two had to be physically separated during production. Even decades later, Dreyfuss has shown no interest in softening his assessment. What makes this feud particularly striking is how well the finished film masks the hostility behind it. On screen, Murray's chaos plays beautifully against Dreyfuss's tightly wound intensity, a dynamic that audiences embraced without ever suspecting how literal that friction was. Off-screen, though, the relationship left scars, and Dreyfuss has never pretended otherwise. Chevy Chase. Few of Bill Murray's feuds feel as deeply personal or as historically loaded as his long-running animosity with Chevy Chase. Their conflict predates film sets and box office numbers, tracing back to the early days of SNL, where ego, insecurity, and creative competition collided head-on. Murray joined SNL as a replacement for Chase, who had already become a breakout star. That alone created tension, but it quickly intensified into something far uglier. Accounts from the time describe verbal abuse, near physical altercations, and a mutual contempt that never fully dissipated. While the two eventually appeared together in Caddyshack, the uneasy truce didn't erase years of resentment. What distinguishes this rivalry from others is how openly hostile it was, not whispered about years later, but actively witnessed by peers. Writers and cast members have recalled Murray erupting at Chase with a fury that went far beyond professional disagreement. The infamous backstage confrontation before Chase hosted SNL in 1978 became legend, cementing both men's reputations as volatile personalities. Unlike some of Murray's later conflicts, this wasn't about power imbalance or subtle intimidation. It was a clash of titans, fueled by pride and insecurity, and it left lasting damage on both sides. While Chase had his own documented reputation for abrasive behavior, the feud underscored a recurring theme in Murray's career. When his ego felt threatened, the results could be explosive. Directors who decided it wasn't worth it. Actors weren't the only one who found Bill Murray difficult to work with. Harold Ramis, one of Murray's closest collaborators, experienced one of the most painful professional ruptures of his life during Groundhog Day. Their partnership had helped define Murray's career, but creative disagreements escalated into shouting matches and long silences. The two didn't speak for years afterward, despite the film's massive success. Sofia Coppola, who famously coaxed a restrained and melancholy performance out of Murray in Lost in Translation, has also acknowledged that working with him required careful navigation. Murray's refusal to commit to a traditional contract, combined with his habit of disappearing or ignoring schedules, placed enormous pressure on production teams. In Coppola's case, the gamble paid off artistically, but it wasn't without risk. Other directors weren't so lucky. Stories have circulated about Murray walking off sets, ignoring direction, or deliberately undermining authority when he disagreed creatively. For filmmakers without Coppola's patience or Ramis's personal history with him, the experience could feel less like collaboration and more like endurance. A pattern that became impossible to ignore. Taken individually, each of these stories might be dismissed as an isolated incident, a bad day, a bruised ego, a clash of personalities. But when viewed together, they form a pattern that's difficult to ignore. Across decades and genres, across co-stars of varying status and experience, similar themes recur: belittling behavior, emotional volatility, and a tendency to test how much others will tolerate. What's striking is not just the number of people who've spoken out, but how consistent their descriptions are, even when separated by years and circumstances. That doesn't negate Bill Murray's talent or cultural impact. His best performances remain deeply beloved, and his influence on modern comedy is undeniable. But the myth of the harmless eccentric collapses under scrutiny. For many who worked with him, the experience wasn't magical or quirky. It was exhausting, demoralizing, and sometimes genuinely distressing. Now it's time to hear from you. Which of these stories was most surprising to hear? Let us know in the comments section below.